you know, one of the, I'm not sure how much this is a difference, but we're not trying to move anyone towards something more positive, basically. I mean, in the meta picture, yes, definitely, that's all of our intention. But we're trying to help people as much as possible fully experience and express whatever is happening, not to try to change it, and to let it evolve in the way it needs to. It's kind of a different principle. I mean, one thing is we've got 8 or 10 hours with people. We don't have to get them back out the door in an hour and a half. So, I mean, I think that kind of work could be useful because it's obviously not absolute. Sometimes we do help people kind of settle and connect, but we don't do it exactly that way.
Yeah, and we're trying to help people be with whatever's coming in a different way than avoiding or shutting down or escaping out of their body. So as much as they can do that, and that's what we're, and then we'll support them. Like we might put our arm around them, or we might sit side by side. And we'll also let them talk about, we'll also let them avoid, if they're noticing that they need to avoid the subject, we'll let them talk about things they want to talk about that are fun. A lot of times their animals will come up, talking about their cats or their dogs.
You know, that's, to me, that picture we showed about the container and then the individual variation among therapists, you know, if you're trained and experienced with that method, I'm sure there's a beautiful way you could weave that in, you know, as your own element to bring to it, too.
Yeah, so before we switch the slide, we had the question about what time does the medicine, what time do they take the medicine? So people come at 9:30 and a.m. we do a drug screening and urine pregnancy test for the women. And then we spend the next half hour doing the preliminary blood pressure and pulse and temperature and talking to them about what their night was like and any other concerns they're having or questions. And then they take the medicine at 10.
So do you collect the information of how much? So do you collect the information of how much sleep they got? Because if you're starting at 9:30, then you're probably at least half the folks you're dealing with have gotten less than 6 hours of sleep.
We don't formally collect that information. We always ask them to write down what they say about it, but we haven't tracked that formally. We also ask them, did they remember not to eat breakfast, because they have to not eat food after midnight. But no, that's an interesting fact. Usually people have gotten even less than 6 hours sleep because they're usually very anxious about what's going to happen, and they have sleep disturbance anyway with PTSD. A lot of the PTSD people routinely only get a few hours sleep.
Occasionally somebody will be really worried and won't even come back to the room, and we'll have to sit with them in the waiting room for a half hour and talk to them about their worries and gradually get them to come back.
One of the things that I think I'm getting from what you're sharing is that the major role of the therapist is really kind of to get out of the way in some ways, and would it be accurate to say that the medicine is actually doing the work in some ways? It's taking the person exactly where they need to go, and the medicine is kind of doing it? Would you say that would be kind of accurate in terms of what the medicine actually does?
I think that's true. I think the medicine and the inner healer are at work together.
Yeah, I would say that's the overriding principle. You know, we say to people, think of the medicine as an ally. The medicine and your inner healer together will take you where you need to go. Having said that, there is this other element that we do believe that there are times when some intervention, some facilitation, or some other therapeutic inquiry or intervention can be very helpful. So it's not absolute, but it's weighted largely especially during the main part of the session, toward what you're saying. Yeah. And then the fact that they're integration sessions, those are, the balance is a little different. The overriding principle is still the same. It's their inner healer that we're there to support. But sometimes we need to move, at least we feel sometimes we do need to remove obstacles, kind of like that emergency department example I've given. We wouldn't want to fail to remove the foreign body if we could, or improve the blood supply or something, or like that, to remove obstacles to the manifestation of what you're saying. But the manifestation of that is the main driving force. We're kind of like attendants to that.
Aside from the interventions that the both of you might do, it seems also that just your kind, healing, loving presence might also have something to do with it and allowing the medicine to do its work. And I just wanted to mention that because it seems just who you are and the space that you hold is an important part of that as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, that's, in a way, that's part of what the therapists are bringing, is a loving, supportive presence. And I think that is a very important agreement. It's part of the set and setting. You know, it's not like, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, these medicines are not like some medicines where you just give a medicine and you have X, Y, or Z effect, and that's what this medicine does. This medicine, what it does is highly dependent on the set and setting, the person's own internal mindset and preparation, and the setting, including largely the quality of presence and support and love from the therapist. Absolutely, yeah.
Having watched some of the sessions, it is therapy, and I think the medicine makes doing therapy much easier or faster. And I think a lot of about how hands-on, hands-off they are will be seen in the vignette.
Yeah, well, thanks, Blue. Yeah, the vignette we're going to do, that Blue's going to help us with, is we've chosen a time later in the session, at the end of the day, when we actually are more active, just to kind of give you a little experience of what it is like when it does get a bit stuck, when it seems to need more from the therapist. So that is part of it too, for sure. So these are, you know, as part of creating that safe setting, we make it explicit. We say to them, you know, we've already talked to them in the introductory sessions about our commitment to be present for them. We say we want to reaffirm our commitment to be present for you today, to make this a safe place for whatever comes up, and we feel, you know, completely confident that we can support you through whatever comes. And you know, remind them about staying present with difficult things that come up, using the breath to move into it.
Sometimes it's really good to let people know that you've been with, like for us, just being with so many people that have done breath work, that we've been with the people that have had a lot of anger and rage, and we know how to work with it. So, you know, to give them the idea that they can trust you and the process, and that you can be there for them.
You know, we remind them that we're going to encourage them to have alternating periods of inner focus with talking to us and the music. And again, we remind them about encouraging them to set aside expectations, have beginner's mind. Viewing anything that comes up as something that's being presented by the inner healing intelligence for healing, and helping them develop trust in that. So, you know, these are quotes of things we've said that come from videos. You know, we trust your inner healing intelligence will bring you what you need for healing. It's much more reliable than anything we could figure out ahead of time with our rational minds. I encourage you to approach whatever comes up as something that's part of your coming up as part of your healing process. So we're repetitive about this. Maybe we'll keep going. Okay. So this is, Carl Jung wrote about this, of course. He probably wrote about everything that we've said in one way or another. This is from the Red Book, kind of about this concept. I found you where I least expected you. You climbed out of a dark shaft. You took away where I thought to take hold. And you gave me where I did not expect anything. And time and again, you brought about fate from new and unexpected quarters. Where I sowed, you robbed me of the harvest, and where I did not sow, you gave me fruit 100-fold. And time and again, I lost the path and found it again, where I would never have foreseen it. At every decisive moment, you let me believe in myself. So we've never actually read this to people, but this is kind of what we're talking about. If you have an agenda, you're not going to discover what comes from new and unexpected quarters. You know, that's going to come from someplace other than your rational mind. Well, one thing we say to people is, you know, don't get ahead of the medicine. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that expression. You know, if you think, okay, I figured that out, now what do I need to do next? What do I need to make the most of this session? We tell them, you know, you don't have to figure that out. If you find yourself going into that kind of thing, just try to realize, I don't want to get ahead of the medicine. The medicine will take me where I need to go along with my inner healing intelligence. And as I said, we never had to bring up the trauma, even though we had an agreement we could. And we've already talked about physical touch. You know, we check in with them again about that at the beginning of the session, remind them of our agreements, them having control. I think it's not essential to do that. I think it's essential to be open to touch and nurturing touch. I don't think it's essential to be to do that resistance kind of body work. I think sometimes it's very helpful if you're comfortable with it and have experience with it. But the main thing is to help them focus on what's happening in their body and let that be expressed. And sometimes just by encouraging them to let the body shake or move can accomplish the same thing. So this is a good one for me to read because I can get long-winded sometimes, and as many of you know, I'm sure, people on MDMA aren't going to track anything too long or complicated. So it's good to use concise communication that is easily followed. And I've had people say, you know, when I haven't done that so well, you know, you lost me. I stopped listening a few sentences ago. Usually there's humor and compassion when they say that to me. That's something that is important. Well, and if you don't do it right, it doesn't really matter because they move on without you and forgive you for not keeping up with them. So, you know, we encourage, as we said, alternating periods of inner focus and communication with us. And often, if people have been talking for a while, or if they seem to be kind of getting more in their heads and getting ahead of themselves a little bit that way, we will suggest, you know, it's always a suggestion, never a requirement, you know, this might be a good time to go back inside and just be present with that. Let the medicine and your inner healing intelligence help you with it. And often they'll do that. And then once people get the hang of it, a lot of times they'll pull up their eyes shades, talk to us for a while, and they'll say, okay, I think it's time for me to go back inside now. And they'll pull their shades down, lie back down, You know, they realize themselves how that works. And, well, and sometimes they don't want to. And you don't argue with them. You know, they may say, no, I really feel like I need to talk now. And sometimes that may be that they're kind of, you know, resisting, in quotes, that they're using that as a way to not feel something as much. But, you know, we trust that if that's the case, it will come around again. And if that's the case, that's probably what they need to do. Or it may be that they just, it's much more useful for them to talk then than to go back inside, and they know that, and we didn't know that. So we only suggest and offer options. We don't insist upon any of it. But one woman said, like in her second session, she'd been up walking fairly early in the session and talking. And we said, you know, this might be a good time to go back inside and talk about a lot of important things. You want to talk or walk? She wants to sit, okay? It was just a suggestion I offered as a choice. Okay.
I was wondering, probably the most helpful thing I've been suggested was to surrender. I heard someone else talking about LSD, and when you first do LSD, and they were doing it by themselves without a therapist. And then later when I had like horrendous ayahuasca experiences and I tried everything I knew from LSD and nothing worked, finally on the final session I tried surrendering. It just changed everything. It just totally, I wonder if you guys explore that concept, your patients?
Yeah, we use those words too. It can be really helpful. Thanks for bringing that up. So again, this is like things that we've introduced people to in the introductory sessions that really encourage fully experiencing whatever comes up, expressing it in whatever way they need to, talking, sound, movement, tears, laughter, whatever's coming. You know, we encourage people to let the sounds come if there's sounds coming. We tell people, you know, this may seem strange to you, and we talk to them about it ahead of time. You know, you might start finding unusual sounds coming from deep inside, even like growling and barking, or anything might happen, and it might sound strange to you, but it's not strange to us. We've seen it many times, we've done it ourselves, and we know that this can be part of the process. So we try to, you know, prepare people to be open to letting that really come. And we just encourage to let it go, let it come.
We've had people whisper and not understand why they were whispering for an hour and a half, and then the next day realizing that that had something to do with a traumatic event that they'd had in a marriage. We've had people regress and talk like a little kid. So, you know, there are lots of experiences that you want to make sure you can normalize for people, that you've seen that before and it's okay.
How often, if at all, when you encourage the participant to stay in a difficult experience, does that trigger full-blown symptoms or panic? And especially in comparison to other methods that are used in PTSD.
Well, it certainly can trigger what appears to be full-blown panic attack. In a way, we don't think of that as symptoms. We think of it as expressing what's coming up, you know, in that setting. You know, and we sometimes tell people, Stan Groff says, a symptom is something that's halfway out. And as it's moving out, it may become intensified. So we do reassure people, you know, sometimes say, you know, this is really difficult, but you're safe, you're okay, this is a safe place to let this really come. Because you've been trying to understandably hold it down for a long time. This is a chance to let it come, even though it's not easy at all. We get that it's really scary and painful. It's part of the healing process. So we try to stay with it that way. Then, of course, you know, we later help people find ways to modulate that in between sessions, and when we realize they can't be in this process 24 hours a day. And so we work with them to help them with that. Later, if you know, there can be waves, we'll talk more about that, but there can be waves of these things coming later in the day, the next week, and we try to prepare them for that and find ways to balance between letting it be expressed and also taking care of themselves, modulating it so that they can do what they need to do. Sometimes we use benzodiazepines in between, temporarily for people like that. So again, it's not absolute, but in general, if it's in the session, we don't view it as like something's gone wrong and the symptoms are triggered. We view it more as part of the process. Does that make sense?
But, you know, sometimes in the beginning they can have what seems like it might be a little panic attack starting when the medicine is starting to get into their system. And during that time, we hold hands if they're comfortable with that. We really talk to them about, okay, slow your breathing down. Yeah, really slow your breathing down. We really guide them through that, and we say, remember, it's going to come in waves. You might experience it, it might build, and then it's going to go away, and then gradually those waves are going to go away, and you're going to start having the positive experience that the medicine will bring you, hopefully. So that, and then another challenging thing that can sometimes happen with people that have had some dissociation is they could have like a flashback right in the beginning where they're right in the middle of the traumatic scene and they're not really sure. I mean, they look like maybe they're totally in it. And if that were happening, you know, we might do a little bit more of saying, you know, you're safe, you're here with us, but you're also in that experience. Might do a little bit more guiding rather than saying, make that experience more, because they're already having it more. And that's happened a couple times with people where they've just had like a full-blown flashback, or where you feel like you're totally kind of disconnected from them and they need to be more connected here with you and feel the safety, and then they can go in the experience.
Yeah, you know, it's important to work with, if the therapist, I mean, there are bound to be times when parts of the therapist are getting concerned. You know, it's not so easy to be with somebody when they seem to be getting, you know, by any objective measure of the average psychiatrist or psychologist walking into the room, they'd be feeling this is going badly and they're making this person worse. So we can have parts of ourselves that may be challenged to trust the process. And you know, they're so used to having people want to do things to suppress their symptoms, you know, with good intentions, that they have trouble trusting it themselves. And if the therapist is having trouble trusting it, then it's really hard to hold the space for it to really come. So it's a time to reconnect with our own trust, and you know, the more we do it, the easier that is to do, but sometimes it's challenging. But if we can connect with our own trust and, you know, good reason to believe that this is going to help them, then that makes it a lot easier to really, for them to feel that it is okay to do it. And you know, we talked a little bit about the different ways of using the breath, but it's not an absolute difference, but for practical purposes, we do divide anxiety that comes up early as the medicine's coming on from anxiety that comes up later, and encourage people to use the breath like diaphragmatic breathing and relax, to try to let it go and relax as much as they can as the medicine is coming on. And then later it's more like using the breath, not to try to relax, but to try to breathe into the feeling, even if it's panic. Yeah.
Yes, I'm curious whether you have people who, almost the opposite of what you've just been talking about, they're just so open and relaxed and happy and safe, much unlike their ordinary life during their session and their work with you, and whether grief comes up or a deep reluctance to go back into their ordinary life.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up, because as you say that, I realize we are in making sure people realize that this is not just blissing out and everything's okay. We may be overemphasizing the difficulties, but of course we use MDMA for a reason, because it does help with that too. And that can be one of the challenges is later on. People have maybe felt comfortable in their body for the first time in years and felt free of anxiety. And yes, there's the whole, there's a definite tendency often to grieve losing that, coming back down, to want to be attached to trying to make that happen, to feel like they've lost it. And so part of the integration process is helping people process that and learn to reconnect to what they learned and the way they felt in the sessions. And sometimes it's very smooth at the end of a session, and sometimes it's really quite difficult for the reasons you're saying. And we try to prepare people for that too, and then work with them to process it when it happens.
Sometimes we try to have them lock that in their body somewhere, that safe place or that relaxed place, so they can go back to it later, or imagine a place where they could imagine that again. Sometimes people will take the music from the session and we'll play that at home and try to recreate that time in the session that they can go back to, and that might be part of their work, that they do that every day. For 10 minutes, play a song that will remind them of it, and so they can reconnect to that.
So I see here it says, encourage to fully experience whatever comes. And I was wondering, from your experience with your work, whether you think that maybe MDMA may also help people be better or more able to speak about their experience. So either this might be something a little bit more for the integrative sessions later, or maybe the experimental sessions. But what I'm getting at is sort of this idea of Eugene Gendlin's, the concept of experiencing, this ability to be, the idea that this experiencing facilitates therapy, being able to talk about either the past or even the present, but to be able to engage in that manner. And I was wondering from your observations if you've seen placebo versus MDMA, if there were any differences or if you could tell.
Yeah, I think there are differences. I think that's one of the things that MDMA does, is allow people to reconnect and express those old experiences better. If I'm understanding the question, I couldn't quite make out everything you said, but yeah, we think that it can, there is power in the placebo sessions of having 8 hours there in the setting can do that too, to a certain extent, but we think part of what happens with the MDMA is it does allow people to do that more.
You mentioned several times that you use music. Could you talk a little bit about what music you use and how you choose it? And as long as I got you, I got a second question, which is, I know that you're doing a lot of the medical things you do because it's a clinical trial, and I'd be interested to hear if if we, if you were actually, this was approved as, therapeutic medicine and was used in just clinical practice, how much of that would also be necessary? So 2 questions.
Well, I'm going to answer the second one first, and then ask Annie to address the music, because she's the expert DJ. But I think a certain amount of medical screening for underlying problems is probably a good idea and necessary in any case. I don't think the blood pressure measurements are necessary. And actually, we're going to ask the FDA to now let us cover up the blood pressure machine. We're going to keep having it take the pressure, but we're not going to look at it. Because in reality, you wouldn't do anything medical in the absence of some symptoms or other manifestations. It doesn't matter what the number is. So we're going to see if they'll let us not look at the number, because that'll help our blinding. I don't think, I think it would be necessary to have the capability for measuring blood pressure and responding if there was a problem, but no reason to monitor it based on what we've seen so far.
Well, the music comes from the breathwork training, and we have 2 full sets that we've used, and they're 8 hours long. They start out with some relaxing music like Peter Cater, and then it starts getting into dramatic music that supports the process, and heartfelt music, and then tapers off to more relaxing music at the end. It has no English words. And then I fill in with some music too, like if there's like anger that's being processed or a lot of energy in the body, I might bring in, with the vets I use Black Hawk Down, which has some really intense driving beat, and then it goes into this woman that's wailing and crying, so it supports both sides. And a lot of times the music really matters, and sometimes people don't even notice it. But it's good to have it there to support.
So we've already really covered this. And again, just validating that, affirming positive, fun, comfortable, even blissful experiences, humor and joy and appreciation and comfort are a really important part of this process. And here are some of the ways, these are quotes from the participants. I feel a whole deeper level of consciousness, calmer, peacefulness. I don't remember ever having this. My mind has never been at peace like this. I never had before felt what I felt today in terms of love and connection. I'm not sure I can reach it again without MDMA, but I'm not without hope that it's possible. Maybe it's like having an aerial map, so now I know there's a trail. So that idea that people have said they felt like they got a template of something different. And even though the MDMA is worn off, they have this sense that they're capable of that. And I got a glimpse of more of what I'm capable of growing into. I'm motivated to keep practicing openness until it gets more developed. Like, we had a man in the first study who got placebo first, and then when we didn't have permission for MDMA, and then, a number of months later came back and had his first MDMA session, and he was a man in his 50s who had been sexually abused when he was 7. And he told us after the session that, he said, I heard people talking about being happy, and I could kind of observe from their behavior what they must be talking about, but I never experienced it in my memory, and I thought that was not something I was capable of, but I experienced happiness in the session, and now I know I'm capable of it. And in fact, he did go on to, experiencing happiness after the session, he no longer was depressed and suicidal by the end of the study. So it, you know, we always ask people, does this seem like it was just a drug effect, or was this something else? And they almost universally say, this was something else. This was my own experience. The drug helped me to access it, but it wasn't just a drug effect. But they still sometimes have that period of time when they're not so sure about whether they can access it again. So this is, we're not that interested in the SUDS really. This is just to kind of illustrate that it can happen either way. This is the first participant in the first study actually. So the SUDS is just subjective limits. Subjective units of distress, 7 being the most distress you can imagine, 1 being no distress. So this person came in for her first session, and her SUDS level right before we gave her the MDMA was 7. She was very, very anxious. She'd never done anything like this before. She had really bad PTSD. So at the 1 hour mark, her SUDS was 1. Actually, she said -15 is what she reported to me. But I didn't have any place to write that down on a scale. So she was off the charts with not being in distress. And then that first session, she, you know, mostly stayed down there. At one point, at about 3 hours, she had a little bit of stress when she was processing the trauma to some extent. But most of the session was connecting with letting the feelings in that she'd survived and that she had a lot to be grateful for. She told us before, you know, I know that I survived the rape. I know that my husband is supportive and my family's doing well, but I can't feel it at all. So the MDMA allowed her to let that in and really experience it on a deep level. And she said, you know, maybe next time I can process the trauma more. So the next time she came in with no distress, SUDS of 1, of course. After that first experience, she was not worried. At 1 hour, it was 6. She went immediately to processing the trauma, and she spent several hours with a high level of distress processing the trauma, and then it came down back to 1 by the end of the session. So for her, it was first having these affirming healing experiences that gave her like a platform to operate from and the strength to go more deeply into the trauma. So it's not always like that. Sometimes it's the other way around. But that's one reason we think it's good not to have an agenda, you know, about when they do what, because their inner healer knows we don't. So again, a non-directive approach with occasional guidance or redirection, as we've been talking about, but offered as a choice. So like invitation rather than direction. So like it might be just a question, would you like to tell us more about that? Or I just noticed your voice changed. Is there something going on that you notice? You know, just in gently inquiring. And accepting the direction of the patient or the participant if they don't do that. Like, as we said, sometimes we say this might be a good time to go back inside, and they say, I've been stuck inside with this for years, so it feels like I need to talk about it more. So we say, okay, you know best, you know. And then, so of course, it could be that this was a kind of a moving away from something, that, you know, saying I don't want to go back inside. Sometimes it seems to be just inner wisdom about needing to not go back inside because they need to talk. Other times it seems to be what some would call resistance, what we would call inner wisdom that they're not ready to do that yet. So either way, if something, if that happens repeatedly and we notice that there's something that they've been, every time they get close to it, they have to go to the bathroom or they start talking about something else. First, we just wait, because often it'll just come around on its own. And they'll say, you know, I realize I've actually been avoiding this, and now I'm ready to talk about it. But if it doesn't, you know, we think sometimes it can be good to sort of challenge the moving away a little bit, but we always do it like as a collaborative, exploratory thing. Like, would you be willing to experiment? I said this to somebody who was actually pinching herself in the leg, which is something she had done before to distract herself in her life. And first we checked to make sure we're not going to let you hurt yourself. Are you hurting yourself? And she said, no, I'm not really hurting myself, I'm just distracting myself. So, you know, I said, would you be willing to experiment with not distracting yourself that way for a few minutes, just to see what you might discover? You know, a lot of choice for her in that. And again, we've talked about the checking in with what's happening in the body and with encouraging movement. And this, I love this Rumi poem about the body, and we look upon the body this way a lot in this work. So let the body speak for you now, without you saying a word. Like the student walking behind the teacher says, this one knows better than I the way. So we say to people, you know, maybe you let your body tell you what you need, or let your body show you what it needs. So this is straightforward. We make sure they don't fall down. Sometimes they're unstable. If they walk, we walk next to them. And we just say, you know, we'll give you space, but we want to be near enough so that if you lost your balance, we can catch you. We've talked about the music, and we tell people if they want silence, we can turn the music off. So we've talked some about the transference. What? Oh yeah, okay. Well, yeah, the part of this is in that example of Annie being a good mother for this person. You know, sometimes we talk to people that Carl Jung said something like, you know, everybody has a number of mothers and fathers, and I may not get this exactly right, so maybe somebody can correct me, but basically we have our biological mother and father, then we have our perception of our biological mother and father, which is related to the first but not the same, and then we have other people in our lives that play that role as mother and father, people that we know, or even teachers that we've never met. And then we have the archetype of mother and father that we relate to in different ways. And so, you know, we've had people in the study that have had really, really terrible mothers and fathers, and there's a lot of grief and rage about that. But to, you know, introduce them to the idea that they actually have more than one mother and father in these other ways, and that this can be a corrective experience. But the transference and the, you know, the countertransference, our feelings toward them, can all get heightened during MDMA sessions, and people are acutely aware of everything you're doing or thinking or feeling, basically. So it's a lot is going to come up, and I think that one example I gave is a good example of the positive transference and countertransference, but we've also had sometimes when it's not so positive. Do you want to talk about that?
I think, you know, this also goes along with working with people that have a lot of trauma, and you think you're going along really fine, and all of a sudden you'll encounter one person that just kind of hits you, and it all kind of comes to a head. But there was a young girl that was between the age of our two daughters that was in our first study, and she had terrible trauma. And when Michael and I left the session, we just were both bawling. I mean, we just went home and bawled. And it was just like this so close to home. So, you know, this is also part of like self-care and learning ways to release some of that you're holding. That you're sitting there hearing some horrible things, you know, for 8 hours sometimes. So, but you know, one thing is you can make mistakes. You can say things that trigger the person, and they might get mad at you. And so, you know, I worked with one of the patients that way. She had said that I had said something that wasn't exactly right, and she had a lot of issues with her mom, and I was just willing to listen to all the ways that I had said that wrong. And what ended up happening was, like, over a number of sessions, I just let her talk about, you know, how that had offended her and how angry she was. And what was really important for her was that I was able to be there and not leave, and that I was never going to leave like her mother did. So, you know, in the end, she said it was so valuable that I was there and I was able to work through the whole thing with her. So a lot of good can come of that, but it doesn't mean that it's always easy. Oh yeah, and there was another guy with his anger was, reminded me a little bit of, I guess, my dad, and he was worried about getting angry with me. He said he was worried about bringing that up with a woman, and I said, well, you know, if you trigger something in me, I'll take care of myself, and I'll leave the room, and I'll go out in the kitchen if I need to, or go out in the other part of the office. But I'm sure that I can be here with you. And we had just a beautiful talk about that, and then it ended up not being an issue. So, you know, if you notice that you have issues that might get in the way, it's just good to maybe bring it up and be able to work with it in ways, other ways.
Okay, that's the end of the section about the experimental session. So, any other thoughts or questions about that? Well, we have the integration sessions. Yeah.
In the course of a session, if someone discovers a previous unknown traumatic experience, is there a tendency that they might get, just kind of by the shock or the newness of this, they might get stuck in that experience? Do you have a way of kind of making sure people move along so they don't get kind of trapped ruminating on something?
Well, that's a good question. We haven't had anybody have a new memory of something that they weren't aware of. We have had people have more details and clarity about something they were aware of. Basically the way we help people move through is first to really, you know, allow them to feel fully heard and have plenty of time and not feel any pressure to get unstuck. And then if they're still feeling stuck, we try to process what that stuck experience is like for them. And then it tends to gradually move, sometimes move through really quickly, and sometimes it's very slow and can feel stuck for a long time. And I guess we don't have a set way of working with that. We try to hang in here and find some balance between being more active to help them, you know, shift their perspective and see what might be helpful in terms of moving through. That's when like each therapist's own background and intuition comes into play, because that is a time when often you may need to be more active, but then it's always that edge, because if you start to let an agenda that this is not okay, and you're coming from that place, then it may make it more stuck. So it's kind of that challenge, and that is probably one of the most challenging scenarios when it really seems stuck. But to try to work with both allowing and giving them plenty of space to process all those feelings and have some ways to help them unstick. And it's not easy. But the MDMA does seem to help with that, but it doesn't miraculously remove that problem for everybody, for sure.
I was just wondering what kind of things you guys would do for self-care, like to be able to hold the kind of space that you guys are talking about, like a neutral space that let someone have their experience, and how you do sessions with yourself periodically to clear it out. So if you're doing sessions all the time, then the protocol kind of it's gonna come up if you see a trend, but to get that out. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Try to do breath work periodically to let some of it out. We use water, hot tub, a lot of self-care like that, massage, supervision, talking. One good thing is we can talk to each other about it. Sometimes we can't stop talking about it.
Part of self-care is sometimes talking about it, sometimes...
Use the mic, please.
Sometimes the self-care is talking about it, sometimes it's learning to stop talking about it and just have some fun, too. And, at different times, I have my own therapist now. Intermittently, I've done therapy and find that helpful, too. But it's a really important topic. I mean, we're going to touch on it at the end, but I'm glad you brought it up, because we don't have time to fully address that, but it is a really important part of working with trauma, because you need to find ways to let it move on through. I get in the hot tub every morning and every night. I'd hate to try it without that.
You said you're with the patient for up to about 8 hours or so, yet the medicine lasts maybe 3 to 6 hours. So once the medicine wears off, are you still with them beyond that time, or is there kind of a natural ending to it where, okay, it's time to part here, or how do you allow the sessions to end? Is it kind of an organic kind of thing, or what?
Yeah, the person that comes and spends the night at the office comes at around 5 or 5:30. So some people are finished, at 4 and feel like they're fine. So if that's the case, we'll wrap things up, but we'll do it slowly, and we'll be around. We have lots of paperwork we have to do, and then the person that's coming for the night will take over and they'll go for a walk. But on the other hand, a lot of times it's not quite so easy. People are often very attached to us being there, and they don't like that transition of having somebody else come in. And that can be one of the difficult challenges of it, because you have already said you're going to be there as long as they need you. And then you're gradually trying to disconnect and go home. And some people have more difficulty with it than others. We start talking about it, for the last couple of hours, and hopefully they've met the attendant. It's easier if they know the attendant and it's been the same attendant at night. But actually the role play that we're going to do happens at 5 o'clock at night. So you'll get to see a little bit of how that unfolds.
My question was also concerning the typical duration of your sessions, and I was also basically curious, to maintain a 6 or 7 hour session, is there a supplemental dose that's instituted at some point during the experience?
There is a supplemental dose at 2 hours, half the original dose. And it's optional. Sometimes some people don't choose to take it, but we think that does prolong it a bit. So maybe if we can hold the other questions and move to the next session unless there's something urgent.